asking the right questions is all about reducing sales resistance. If you're asking the right questions and recapping what's important to your prospect, that sales resistance will melt away. There will be nothing to prevent them from wanting to move forward with you. Welcome, everyone, to the Close More Sales podcast. On today's episode, we are going to get super specific. We will be diving into some pretty advanced sales content around asking questions. So if you are brand new to this industry or haven't been through any of our training before, there's a chance this will feel like it's going a little bit over your head, just a tiny bit. However, I have been told specifically not to dumb down the training aspect for this podcast, because it is always better to have an episode packed so full of value that people eagerly want to go back and listen again, rather than feeling like they understood all the concepts when we're only halfway done. So that's what we're doing today. That is exactly why we are getting really specific about some tactical aspects of asking amazing sales questions. But first, why should you listen to the show to begin with? What's the purpose of it? Our purpose is to empower sales professionals and entrepreneurs to push themselves to grow, achieve unimaginable success without burning out, and ultimately transform their lives. I'm Ian Ross, and I am obsessed with all things sales, and I work with teams across the country to make more money by doing exactly what we're covering on this podcast, asking better questions. The most proven path to achieving financial freedom is maximizing your earning potential. And a sales role is the lowest barrier with the highest possible ceiling for entry onto that path. Anyone can become a killer salesperson with the right techniques, mindset, and consistency. And everything we cover on this podcast is geared toward one thing: helping you close more sales so you can live the life you want. We are still in the growth stage for this podcast. So if you get value from this episode today, which I am very confident that you will, follow and subscribe and all that jazz. Let us know either in the comments on YouTube or in a review where you listen to podcasts, and tell us what it is you got out of the show. And let other people know about this show too. Please don't keep it a secret. The more listeners we have, the more incentivized I will be to give out crazy value for free on this show. So if you want more of this, of what we're going to be covering today, let others know. Because here's the thing: if you have conversations where how well you speak determines how much money you can make, you are in a sales role. And if you would like to get better at what you do, aka make more money, text CLOSE, CLOSE, to 33777, and we'll see if we can help you out along the process. First now, let's start a little conceptual before diving in and getting a little bit more specific here. I want to ask the question first of thinking about this of what is sales resistance? What is sales resistance? What is sales resistance? Take a second now and think about it yourself. There's plenty of people who've got 50,000 different answers. You can see it in this book here, this book there. Whatever your answer, what's more important than kind of the what of what it is, the dictionary definition of what it is, what's more important is where does it come from? Why does it happen? So how I describe sales resistance is an impediment to moving through the process. That can be as something as obvious as an objection at the end of the sale. I need to think about it. That's too much money. I need to talk to someone. I don't know if that's for me, whatever. Or it can be an aspect of resistance that happens far earlier than actually asking for the sale or going for the close. It can simply happen where if I've got a certain aspect of my process I need to go through and it's not, they're giving me some pushback there. They're not wanting to reveal what their budget is. They're not telling me what their timeline is. They're just not playing ball with my process and engaging with what I'm doing, it's an aspect of sales resistance. Where does sales resistance come from then? Because if it's not simply just like an objection, it could also be not willing to play ball to go through my process. Sales resistance in its purest form comes from three main areas. It comes from feeling pushed, ignored, or misunderstood. Those are the three areas that I always think about. Sales resistance comes from feeling pushed, ignored, or misunderstood. So, in theory, here, the context of this resistance, in my humble opinion, as a sales trainer, it is the main obstacle in selling anything, right? Like sales resistance in itself is the only thing stopping you from being able to sell ice to Eskimos, for instance, right? Even selling something that someone doesn't need. Now, side note here, which is important for me to say using this example, because that's a old school example. I can sell ice to an Eskimo. If you actually sell ice to Eskimos, you are not a salesperson. You're a con man. Convincing someone to buy something they don't want or need is for criminals, right? So only sell solutions that actually benefit someone, that solve a need, that solve a want, that help someone out, that fix a problem. That's what you should be selling. So let's make sure we get that clear. However, it's worth noting that the same techniques that gets an Eskimo to be willing to buy ice even when he's surrounded by it can be pretty transferable to someone who's also solving a really important problem for someone, or allowing them to invest in something or buy an asset or buy software, whatever you're selling, buy insurance that could have a huge positive benefit on their life. The tactics of getting someone to take action don't have to be vastly different. It's the intent behind that individual salesperson, sometimes the company that trained them, on how to utilize that and what you're selling. I want to make sure I differentiate between those two. So resistance is the only thing standing in the way from selling ice to Eskimos in theory. So we want to make sure we reduce resistance. So that being said, why do I want to focus on questions? I say it in the intro of every episode, right? I help teams across the country make more money by asking better questions. So why focus on questions? Well, if you ask the right questions, you are in essence controlling the prospect's responses. You're controlling what they say if the questions are formulated correctly and you can guide them over time. And if I can control what the prospect says, I can influence, if not dictate, their reality. And I'm going to break that down in a second here. So if you're watching this podcast, you've been exposed to some type of sales training in the past. You've read a book, you've watched YouTube videos, you're an active salesperson yourself who went through something at your company, like you're exposed to this idea. So hopefully the concept that he who asks the questions controls the conversation is not brand new to you. And when you hear that, even if you haven't heard it for a while, you should be like, yeah, of course, right? Yes, obviously. The person asking the questions, not the person talking, is the one who's dictating how the conversation goes. Because no matter what anyone says, the next question dictates the direction with which that person speaks. So if I ask questions correctly, I'm influencing the reality. The way I'm doing that is because I am influencing what they say out loud to me. And this is one of my most fundamental points when I'm coaching individual salespeople or training entire teams. Part of the reason I want to ask questions is because if it comes out of my mouth, it's salespeople talk. They can choose not to believe me. But if it comes out of the prospect's mouth, it's gospel. It is reality. It is what their life is defined by. It's what they think is true. It's what they think is real because they verbalize it. So how I ask questions to get you talking as the prospect is influencing, if not outright dictating, your reality with how carefully I can ask my question. And I'm going to get to the specific tactics there here coming up in a second. So one of the first things to think about is making sure that I make a prospect feel like it was their idea to solve their problem. And that can happen entirely from questions. So if I ask questions about what's important to you and I'm repeating back what's important to you, and you go, yeah, that is what's important to me. That is what I want to do. This solves that. If you feel heard and understood, if I ask the right questions, it will feel like your idea. It's not, I didn't tell you this. You told me that. Am I correct? Am I right about that? And they're like, yeah, you definitely said that. Or it sounds like you're telling me this and there's something else going on. If I'm just constantly repeating back what you said to me in sort of the recapping of your answers as I'm asking strategically well-oriented questions, dictating your reality, you will feel like it was your idea. That's what questions allow this to have happen. Instead of me telling you, no, you need this, instead of going, it sounds like this is important. Is there anything else? And you keep verbalizing ways that make it your idea. If it's your idea to solve this problem, what does it prevent? It prevents you from feeling pushed, feeling ignored, and feeling misunderstood. AKA, it prevents sales resistance. Is that clear? I want to make sure that that didn't get glossed over. If I am asking the right questions so that your answers align with what I need to hear and can repeat back to you, those right questions allow it to feel like it was your idea to have me solve your problem for you or to help you solve your problem with my product or service because you verbalized it. I didn't tell you. I asked you questions and you told me if it made sense or not. So if I do that appropriately, you will feel like this was your idea. And if it's your idea, you will not feel pushed and you will not feel ignored and you will not feel misunderstood, which prevents sales resistance, which is the only thing stopping you from selling ice to Eskimos. It is the most important part of persuasion, let's say, is making it be about the other person, not myself. And the best way to do that is asking questions. So, and an effective questioning also, it builds the right type of rapport and it builds it incrementally. So, what is the right type of rapport versus what is the incorrect or sort of superficial type of rapport? Correct rapport, real rapport, is trust. Real rapport is trust, not just likability. There are plenty of people in my life who I like quite a bit, but I don't want them even glimpsing the numbers on my Amex card, right? I'll go to a barbecue with you. We'll go to a basketball game, a baseball. We're going to have a great time hanging out, family members, right? Uncles, cousins that you can imagine like, oh, I like this person a lot, but I don't trust them. I want to hang out with them, but I don't trust them. At that same time, I have had doctors, a surgeon as well, who I trust entirely. I didn't particularly like the man. He wasn't coming over to have hot dogs. Like we weren't bonding in that sense. But when he made a recommendation regarding surgery, I took him seriously because he had the right type of rapport, which is trust. And building trust has to be done incrementally, and it's done incrementally through good questions. Think about it this way. If I were to walk into the doctor's office and say, hey, doc, like my knee's been bothering me. And he goes, oh, great. I know exactly what to recommend to you. We need to amputate below the knee. Like, what? All I just says my knees hurt. Like, I don't trust him. I'm freaked out. There's no way. Like, totally shut off. But if he asks me questions, like how long has it been going on for? What about the pain? Does this hurt at this angle? Does it hurt at that angle? Okay, now we got to run some tests. Okay, well, I see this, this, and this. When did you first notice that? If he's engaging with me, I'm more likely to take his recommendation, right? If he goes, hey, bad news, you're infected below the knee. It's going to your heart. If we don't amputate immediately, you might die. I'm losing my leg below my knee, right? But that only comes through him going through the process of asking great questions. Now, he's doing a medical test, but a sales conversation, asking good questions is the equivalent of a CAT scan or an X-ray, right? It's that equivalent. So making sure you run the right type of diagnostics so that the prescription, the recommendation feels real because it feels like something I can trust because the due diligence was done rather than going, "Hi, nice to meet you. How are you?" I know exactly what I can sell you. And that's might seem like an extreme example compared to whatever it is you're selling to your prospects and a doctor recommending that there's an amputation below the knee. But the sensation of not asking good questions and building trust through the diagnostic of what's important to them is the equivalent. It's the equivalent emotionally. So be aware of that and look for great questions rather than explanations. And I hear this all the time too. I'm talking to salespeople and I ask like, oh, what happened here? What happened with that? What went wrong? And I hear the same type of explanation over and over and over again. What do they say to me? Well, I tried to explain to him that this. I tried to tell him that, I was trying to explain that he's thinking about the wrong thing. Even by the very nature of starting the description of what the problem was with, I tried to tell him, I tried to explain to her, tried to make her understand that even orienting that way is the wrong way of thinking. Instead of, I asked questions around this that could influence, I asked questions around this and I couldn't get it across. If you're trying to explain something rather than asking questions about what's important to them, you're swinging in the dark. It's just not as effective. So, and we're going to get into the specifics here of those exact types of questions and how you can paint that path forward in just a moment. Let's talk a little bit here about making sure as you're asking questions, you're doing sort of three main things. And I want to make sure I seem genuinely interested in my prospect. I'm using active listening and engaging empathetic thinking. I'm not simply waiting for my turn to speak. And I'm demonstrating, most importantly, this general vibe of curiosity. So what am I doing with my questions in a sales conversation? We are paving a way forward together. We're paving a way in a certain direction with questions, with my curiosity. I stay curious, I stay skeptical of my own understanding, and I keep asking you questions to figure out what's important to you and having a level of hesitancy regarding what the right recommendation for you will end up being. I don't have extreme certainty. I'm still asking questions so that we can pave a path forward. And if I do this right, every single question is like another 5 feet forward in a path. And it's helping the prospect reveal their reasons for making a decision. It's done entirely through effective questioning and having a curious tone, curious demeanor, just embodying curiosity in its whole to uncover deeper needs and motivations. I want to have a curiosity-driven approach to lead to the deeper, more meaningful sales conversations that allows you, the prospect, to reveal to me exactly what is important to you and what needs to get done. So this is the overarching view of why I'm asking questions and what I'm thinking about in the asking of those questions. So I want to get hyper-focused on one specific type of amazing question for the most of the rest of this episode. And that is an or question. What do I mean by an or question? Here's an example of that. So, is this something you wanted to do soon, or is there something I'm missing? Right? Do you understand that? Is this something you wanted to do soon, or is there something I'm missing? It's these two different questions. Those are technically two different questions. I could say, is there something I'm missing, or is this something you wanted to do soon? By including the or, I do something very specific and it's very intentional. I mentioned earlier that we're paving a path forward with my curiosity. We're paving a path towards the natural conclusion, which is you wanting to buy whatever it is I'm selling. And the way I do that is making sure I ask questions like this that feel open-ended, but still point in a direction. So with an or question like this, and I'll get more specific in a second, I view it's almost like I point two little poles in the ground. And I'm saying, you're answering in between these two things. So is this something you wanted to do soon? or is there something I'm missing? Who knows what they're going to answer? By the nature of that, it doesn't feel like I'm forcing someone to give me a specific answer. You've probably seen sales trainers or content online where someone's asking the most precise, you have to answer exactly one way, right? You care about your family, correct? You want to do this, yes or no? At the end of this is important to you, yes or no, right? And you do that over and over again, and the prospect can tell they're being forced in a direction. It doesn't feel good. When you're watching those clips on social media or YouTube, you can probably tell it doesn't feel good. You're hoping the prospect doesn't notice. Oh, I hope the prospect is just a stupid old person who won't question the fact that I'm forcing them down a certain direction. But if I ask a version of an or question like this, is this something you want to do soon, or is there something I'm missing? What is the difference between those two tactics, the two techniques of you want to do this, correct? And is this something you want to do soon, or is there something I'm missing? When I say you want to do this today, correct? They can either go, yeah, I do, or no, I don't, right? It's just a forward backwards type of motion. And by the nature of being forceful and pressuring them, I might get counterfeit yeses, and it's hard to know. And if I get a no, they're pulling me back through the process, and I'm not making any progress forward. It's not going well. So either or, that's a substandard approach because I can't tell if they're lying or not if it's just a clear yes or no question. Either they're going to say no, and then it doesn't move the sale along, or I don't know if they really mean it when they say yes. That is not how you want to ask a question. But back to my previous example, is this something you wanted to do soon, or is there something I'm missing? I planted two different poles in the ground, and the prospect gets to feel like, hey, I have all the movement in the world and how they answer it. Who knows which one they'll be answering? They might say, yeah, I did want to do this soon. Or they might go, no, I don't know. Or they might go, no, actually, the biggest thing is I've got someone else I need to talk to first, or I'm shopping around, right? There's a myriad of answers that they could give me to something that feels so broad. The expert salesperson, when I ask one question like that, plant, the person can move back and forth here, but then I follow up with another one, it's another two, and another two, and another two. This is paving a path forward. It's not paving a line forward. So the prospect can feel like they have all the room to maneuver around, but by continually asking questions that are open-ended this way, that will never give them the sensation that they are being forced to give me a certain answer. But stacking them in a row, is this something you want to do soon, or is there something I'm missing? Is there something else going on, or is this something that you're feeling confident about doing? When I start doing this, the nature of doing this over and over again, and again, I'll talk about how to make sure they don't feel like they're quote unquote catching on or feeling like they're being interrogated or you're doing the same thing over and over again. But this general approach of planting two different posts and two different posts and two different posts so that, again, I talk about this visually, they can move as much as they want in between, but ultimately they're still moving down the path to ultimately choose my product or service or choose me to represent them or train them, whatever it is, allows me to have a far more effective approach, not just in closing the prospect on the first time, but also in preventing buyer's remorse. What's the biggest issue with you want this now? Yes. Is that even if you get them all the way to sign up and they're just, yeah, they sign up, it doesn't take very long. And those of you who've done those really hard-nosed approaches know exactly what I'm talking about, where the next day they suddenly want to cancel what they seemed so certain before. You bullied them into making a decision. And as soon as you're not standing over their shoulder, giving them a forceful handshake saying, you need to do this now, they go, I didn't really want this. I didn't feel like this was my idea. Just because I spent money? No, I don't want to do this now. And so if I make sure it feels like your idea so that you never felt forced, not only is it a more effective close rate because I'm not getting counterfeit yeses where then they pull back at the end anyway, but for those that do close, they're less likely to cancel. So let's get more specifics about the or strategy as well here. So is this something you wanted to do soon, or is there something I'm missing? Sometimes I might not even finish it with the power of or questions. So I might go, is this something you wanted to do soon, or, right? I can even just trail off. The power of or is that it's two things planted in the ground. So they can feel like they can move around there. I love this so much. And then also I can bury certain realities within that question that are kind of implied that based on what they're answering. So now I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head. I could say, let's say I'm selling sales training, for instance. So I might say, is this something you probably don't feel like that's worth of investing in, or is it just because you've already got other people you're using? Who knows how they're going to answer that? Either way, stacking those questions in a row will allow me to guide them towards something that makes sense for me without them feeling forced, without them feeling pressured. This is the key here. So another aspect of amazing questions, and this kind of is a little bit like with or questions as well, though it's not exactly an or question, is stacking questions the right way. So I'll give you an example, and then we'll talk a little bit more about stacking questions. So let's just say someone reveals some type of pain, or some type of concern about moving forward, but they're not super clear on it, which is how most prospects will bring up a pain, a hesitation, a concern, something about not moving forward. They don't tend to just tell you outright directly. Wouldn't it be a much easier job if that were the case? However, part of the reason we have all these tactics and trainings is because people are on guard around salespeople. And so my job, knowing I'm selling something that benefits you, is to do my very best to either make sure I've effectively disqualified you or given you the chance to disqualify yourself, is really what I mean, so that I know this doesn't work for you, or I do everything in my power, using all my strategies and abilities to make sure if I'm giving you something or selling you something that helps you, that I can get you to want to take action on that. That's why we do this. It's not to try and get someone to buy something they don't need. It's to make sure if I know this helps someone, I want to do everything in my power to make sure I get them getting it, right? Comes in believing in what you're selling, is that you can get not aggressive in terms of the conversation, but aggressive in pursuit of using the right tactics and techniques to get someone to want to take action. You can feel good about learning everything you can to try and sell something because you're confident it helps them. If you are ever selling a product you don't like, you don't believe in, or you know the company is doing people wrong, run for the freaking hills, because you are never going to be, there's only two outcomes. You are either never going to be able to level up and be as good as you want to be, or two, your own moral compass will erode over time as well as you blend into that company. And chances are it's probably a mix of both. So don't sell things that people don't need or want or doesn't solve a problem. Just reiterating that point again. That's really what I mean by ethical selling. So just stacking questions, back onto it. Someone has said some type of hesitation to me or revealed some type of concern. I stack questions in a very specific way, which could be, here, that's interesting. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Or what are the hesitations there? Let me repeat that. Do you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Or what are the hesitations there? Right? So let's talk about this now. Those are two different questions, right? Would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? What are the hesitations there? Stacking questions needs to be done precisely. If you do this wrong, you're doing it very, very wrong. Here's an example of incorrectly stacked questions. Let's say I'm talking to someone I'm going to try and buy their house off market at a discount, and I'm asking about where they're planning on going. This is doing it incorrectly. Okay, do you know where you're going to move to? Are you looking for a house, apartment? Do you have maybe a job lined up? Or maybe are you just thinking of renting this house out instead of selling it? What question are they supposed to answer there? Is that clear? That's how many people stack questions. And if the questions themselves, they don't know what they're supposed to answer, what you're doing is confusing the prospect unnecessarily. You don't need to confuse them. So don't be like, oh yeah, you looking for a house, apartment, or like you got a job lined up, but like what's the plan? Those are incorrectly stacked because it's not clear what questions they could answer. We want to make this as easy on the minds of our prospect as possible, while also being strategic when we make it harder. So the nature of that question is totally wrong. But here is a correctly stacked question. So, would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Like, what are the hesitations there? Again, those are two questions. Would you mind telling me more about that? What are the hesitations there? So, for those of you been watching the Close More Sales podcast, you might notice a technique I did. What are the hesitations there? Is kind of a tough question. If not, it's certainly a direct question. What are your hesitations? Whoa, we've only been talking for 20 minutes. You're going to ask my hesitations? What I did, would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Is I closed the question off before opening it up. But instead of waiting for the answer, I like rolled it together in a way that is kind of like an or question. So, would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? What are the hesitations there? I could have said, would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Or what are the hesitations there? The or is not necessary. I'm just trying to make sure they understand I'm planting a flag. But all I'm really doing is asking, what are your hesitations? But by including something that's very easy to answer, would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? No, I don't mind telling you. What are the hesitations there? Instead of making sure I had to get an answer to that first one, I can just combine them in a way where even hearing that first part of the question, it feels like they've given me permission to even answer it. So it softened the blow of that tougher question. That's correctly stacking questions. So they should always be, they should flow together logically, and it should be building on the previous answers. It should feel like a natural conversation. So it helps guide the prospect without overwhelming them, right? If they don't know what they should be answering, I overwhelmed them and made it too hard. But if I made sure there were a natural progression, like, would you mind telling me about that? Or like, what's going on? They won't feel forced into the answer. They won't feel like it's a really direct, tough question because I'm planting these two little posts in the ground of different questions technically, but it makes it easy for them to talk. Doesn't make it harder rather than going, are you going to be renting this place or are you moving to Florida or where are you moving to? Do you have a job lined up? Whoa, what am I supposed to answer? I'm overwhelmed. I don't want to overwhelm the brain. I want to make it easier for them, not harder in that sense. Before I also continue on about showing a few more aspects of questions, there's a really, really key point here about recapping between questions. I talked about how I'm planning these two posts and guiding a path forward with my curiosity. However, if I'm doing that, I'm just doing it over and over and over and over again, I run the risk of the prospect feeling like I'm interrogating them, and we don't want that. So this is how I think about this. I think of every time I ask a question, it's been a while since I've played video games, but every time I ask a question, it's like casting a spell in a video game. Okay? And every time you cast a spell, it's called like I'm casting a fireball or something. Cast a fireball. In the video games I played, you'd have like a mana bar, and the mana bar would go down. The problem is if I go question, 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 it's the equivalent in a video game of going fireball, 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 right? If I do that over and over again, what happens is my mana bar drains. And not only if I do it too many times, I run out of mana, aka lose the sale, and I can't do it. I can't do anything. I can't get the sale done because I just made you feel interrogated. But even just using this example, as the mana bar drains, the fireball gets less effective. So how do we solve this issue? How do we fix this problem? The key is recapping their answers, recapping back what they said to me between casting spells, between questions. This is the equivalent in the video game example of I cast the fireball and drain some mana, and they answer it, and then I recap what they said to me. It's the equivalent then of drinking a mana potion to refill my mana bar so that I can cast more spells, ask more questions. Is that clear? Like, I want to make sure. So it's like, let's say, tell me a little bit more about that. Or like, what are the hesitations there? Cast a fireball. And then they answer me. And then if they answer me, I just go, tell me the next thing. And I ask another question. Without recapping, I'm draining my mana bar. But instead, if I make sure that I recap what they said back to me, what I'm looking for in a recap are three main things. Some aspect of just what they said, sort of like the logical description of what they said. what they feel or felt, depending on if they're describing something currently going on or something from the past, or some aspect of their identity, kind of thing, something that they feel aligned with that feels like defines them. That's what I'm always kind of looking for to recap. So if I say, would you mind like telling me a little bit more about that? What are the hesitations there? And they say, yeah, I mean, the main thing is right now I've been talking to my brother and he doesn't think I should move because and I want to make sure I know I need to, but I feel bad if I just like move without having a conversation with him first. So before I ask the next question, I need to recap, aka take a mana potion so I can cast another spell. And what I would then say is to that answer, I'd be like, wow, it sounds like making sure that you don't offend your brother, even though you know you need to do this, is really important to you. You sound like family matters a lot to you. Yeah, that's right. I do. That's true. I know I need to do this though. And now my next question could be something along the lines of, would he be upset with you if you really need to do this and get it done? Like there's a bunch of different ways I could take that. But let's talk about that recap. What did I do? Simply trying to focus on a little bit of what she said in that example so she felt heard. But then I also included a little aspect of, man, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. And that can be, I probably actually would have said, that can be tough knowing you need to do something and having a family member who sort of has a belief that you talk to them that is preventing you from doing it. It sounds like family is really important to you, though, at least making sure that you don't upset them. Then some aspect of their identity. Now, I don't do all three in every single recap. That's a little bit too much of it's a little too precious to try and cover all those things. But in the ideal setup, I'm hitting those points or at least one or two of those points. Some aspect of just the pure nature of what they said, how they feel or felt about it, and something about their identity. And the identity thing, you'll see this a lot in high ticket sales training. Say I'm talking to some guy and I'm trying to get him to sign up for fitness coaching, right? And he's like, yeah, no, he's describing his life and talk to me about what he wants to do. It's a common tactic in high ticket sales to train them to be like, man, it sounds like you're someone who, when you decide, you know, you need to do something, you take action on it. You just get that done. Like, yeah, I am that guy. The reason they are recapping that way is because then if you verbalize that identity, you want to be congruent with what your actions, with what you said, and or at least say who you are. That's why I'm always asking questions so that you are verbalizing what's important to you. So if I just tell you you are that guy and you don't say anything, this doesn't work. But if I make a labeling statement, it sounds like, it seems like, it feels like some aspect of what I'm hearing, but some type of labeling statement like that, and you go, that's right, I am that guy. You have now outwardly verbalized, that's my identity. And when it comes time to the end of the sale, you're more likely to want to try and stick to that identity and therefore less likely to tell me, well, now I need to think it over. Of course, the problem is in high ticket sales, most of the time, those salespeople then go, what? I thought you were a man of your word. You said you'd take action. And then raises the resistance all the more because they're feeling pushed and feeling attacked. My tactic is usually, gosh, I remember at the start you said you're the type of person who likes to take action on things when you know you want to. Now I'm hearing you want to think about it. That's probably my fault. I must have done something to lose your trust when we were talking, and that's why you don't feel like comfortable moving forward. I blame myself in calling out the elephant in the room. So that way their resistance isn't raised in that sense because I'm blaming myself. They can come rescue me. They don't have to feel like I'm calling them a liar or saying they're being inconsistent. They get to not only go, yeah, now I can be congruent with my beliefs. They can also go, oh, I can rescue this poor salesperson from his confusion and from blaming himself. That's a little side thing. So always try and recap after questions in some way, shape, or form to help them feel heard and understood. Look for what they said, what they feel or felt, or some aspect of their identity. And another point, some questions require more mana, needing some like almost like preparation in the asking. So in the sense of the casting a spell thing, if I were to say, let's say the question, is this something you want to move forward today, or or is there something else I'm missing? Let's say I say that. So were you looking forward to try and get this started today, or is there something else I'm missing? Looking forward to get this started today is a fireball of a question. But in the other one I've been going to, what are your hesitations? That's like a meteor from the sky, right? So what I did to soften that is closing it off before opening it up. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Or like, what are your hesitations to really get this done? What are your hesitations to really get this done is a intense question. That's not a fireball. That's a meteor. That's more mana. So by asking it after I say, like, if you don't mind me asking, like, could you just tell me a little bit more about that? Like, what are the hesitations? It's taking a power up in a video game so that I can cast a bigger spell. I hope this example is hitting home the way I want it to, but it's really, really important is that there's different levels of questions. So another example, could be like, would you mind telling me a little bit more about that? Or like, what are your hesitations there? Right. So asking a tough question needs some aspect of either permission or preparation to ensure maximum effectiveness. So that I always want to try and do that. And recapping constantly between questions as well, it reinforces the prospect's statements and it demonstrates active listening to increase what we were talking about before, feeling heard, and they will not feel misunderstood if you're always saying back what is important to them. So, what am I looking for when I ask this? I am always looking for motivation, right? In the answers of what they're telling me. The reason I ask these types of questions, the reason I'm paving a path forward with my curiosity is I am looking for motivation in their answers. And motivation can be described either in terms of pain and or gain. That's what I'm looking for. So I did a previous episode on asking questions about pain. Pain is a more powerful action motivator to get someone going rather than gain. But I'll take gain as well. I'm always looking for reasons to want to move forward. So, what are the hesitations there? Tell me a little bit more about that. Is this something you want to do soon, or is there something else I'm missing? Understanding their motivation helps me tailor my solution to their problem, which will become their solution, to the specific needs that they have. So I'm always looking and recapping what's important to them. The way my closing question also is usually like, if we can take care of X, and we can take care of Y and take care of Z, how should we prioritize this? It's one of my favorite closing questions. Or we can take care of X, Y, and Z. Do you feel like that would be helpful? So let's say we were talking to someone about getting them out of their house. I can say, for X, let's say X is get you out of here in under 30 days. Y is not have to worry about your wife falling down the stairs here in the house and all the consequences of that. And Z is a hands-off experience where you're just picking up a check and moving on with your life. Right. So part of the reason I can recap their issues to them in my closing question is because as I was casting my spells throughout the whole consultation, I was constantly recapping anyway. So by me, I've been asked, how did you remember all those issues? Well, I said them out loud about 50 times while asking questions because I cast a spell and took a mana potion. Cast a spell, took a mana potion. I asked a question based on what they told me. I recapped what they said. So since I verbalized back to them what they had said to me so that they felt heard and understood, looking for what they said, how they feel or felt, and some aspect of their identity. By the time we're getting to the close and half hour kind of thing, I've verbalized it enough out loud that I don't need to write it down. My active listening skills are engaged to the point where I can recall their important points because I'm not repeating it back out loud for the very first time when I go for the close. I've said it constantly so that they felt like we were in tune and I was dealing with them and their issues. So if I could say, so if we can get you out here in under 30 days, you can make sure you don't have to worry about your wife falling down the stairs at this house and the consequences of that. And it ends up just being a hands-off experience where you're basically just picking on a check and you're just moving on with your life and getting paid and getting you into your next place. How should we prioritize this? How powerful is that as a closing question? The reason I can do that without having to write everything down is because I was recapping the whole time. And I'm able to make sure that instead of saying how other people might try and buy that home, which is, I'll pay you $200,000 for it or something, I can recap exactly what they told me is important to them to deal to make sure how I present my $200,000 or even less. It might be less money, but it feels so customized they want to move forward with it. Motivation can always be a mix of avoiding pain and seeking gain, but delving deeper into the aspects of what is motivating them through recapping, asking questions, tell me more about that, will build a stronger case towards recommending my solution. It's the equivalent of the diagnostics I was talking about earlier in the episode of examining my knee, giving me the CAT scan of my head, the x-ray of my joints. These are the sort of real life examples to think about. Is like, that's how to do that. Also, key here, I was talking before about the or questions before I get up and wrap up the episode. With asking or questions, there are 3 main levels of questions. I want to make this clear before I finish up. What is a bad example of an or question on 2 different levels, and what's a good example? I'll give you 2 bad examples. One is if I'm asking someone about their house and I say, is the roof 10 years old or 15 years old? What's the point of that or question? Those are 2 easy questions to answer because they're just 10. Oh, no, it's 15, right? So questions usually come in sort of 3 main levels: easy, tough, and just kind of direct. Something that's not easy. There's not an easy question. It's direct, but maybe not tough because it's not emotionally charged. So by tough, I mean there's an emotional aspect to them. Easy is just not, there's no emotional exertion for them to answer. They don't have to think too deeply. And then direct is a thing that is very direct about something that's important to them, but maybe there's not that emotional impact. And the key to asking great or questions, of planting 2 posts in the road, paving a path forward with my curiosity, is I never want to mix with the same level of question. So is the roof 10 years old or 15 years old are 2 easy things. Don't want to do that. If I were to say, in the example I gave, what are your hesitations there? I use an easy one of, would you be willing to tell me a little bit more about that? Or what are your hesitations there? Would you be willing to tell me a little bit more about that is easy because it's a yes or no question. What are the hesitations there is a tough question because now we got to confront the emotions of why they don't want to move forward rather than just something as obvious or as easy as like a yes or no question or it's 10 or 15 years. So what would be a bad example of 2 hard questions? Being like, do you feel like you've been taken advantage of in the past, or what are your hesitations now? Those are 2 hard questions. That's not an effective or question. It makes it too hard for them to answer. Is this clear? I want to make sure this is clear. If I ask 2 hard questions or two tough, I would call them. If I ask 2 tough questions, two direct questions, 2 easy questions, the power of this technique goes away. The power is in mixing the levels. That is what makes it feel to the prospect that they're being guided forward, but they feel like they have all the room to move around. So even though at the end of this, it either makes sense to move forward or it doesn't, I'm either confident that you disqualify yourself or you're begging me to take your credit card. Either way, I want to make sure I don't make it too difficult for you. So if I make it too easy, there's no point in even asking the question. There was no point in using the technique on that. It was a complete waste of effort. And if I made it too hard, I made it too hard for you to answer. And you felt that resistance. You felt that tug. So I want to make sure there's 3 levels of questions: easy, tough, and direct. When I'm using or questions, I never want to use 2 of the same. So always look for that. In conclusion here, to summarize, asking the right questions is all about reducing sales resistance. And where does sales resistance come from? Feeling pushed, ignored, or misunderstood. And if I am planning 2 posts and they're telling me they're moving between it, they will not feel pushed because they felt like they had all the room to move around. That's the power of that. If I'm recapping exactly what they said back to me, they will never feel ignored. I can't possibly make the wrong recommendation, right? Because I've said if we can take care of X, we can take care of Y, we can take care of Z, and those 3 things are exactly what they told me is important to them, they won't feel misunderstood, and they certainly won't feel ignored, right? It covers all 3 of those aspects, assuming that you're selling something that benefits them, right? You will get sales resistance if you're trying to sell someone to someone that just doesn't make any sense for them, or it's way more expensive than anything they could want, right? So here's an example. If someone you're talking to, your prospect, has absolutely no money and you're trying to sell them a luxury car, they may want the luxury car, but they can't afford the luxury car. So just because they don't move forward with you doesn't mean that it's therefore they either felt like they were ignored or pushed or misunderstood because they don't have the money for it. So this is assuming that what you're doing fits the criteria of making sense for the person. If it does, if you're doing this right, those are the reasons you're going to get a level of sales resistance. And if you're asking the right questions and recapping what's important to your prospect, that sales resistance will melt away. There will be nothing to prevent them from wanting to move forward with you. So recap to them their important points, talk about what they'd said, how they feel or felt in some aspect of their identity. Think about the types of questions, those or questions that shouldn't just be easy, shouldn't just be tough, and it shouldn't just be direct. And make sure when you're stacking questions, when you're going through things that way, you always want to make sure that you're very, very conscious of not overwhelming your prospect, not asking them so many things in a row that they don't know what to answer. Correctly stacking is just kind of an equivalent of the OR technique, which is making it easy and logical to move through it so that the question's easier to answer rather than more difficult. It should actually lessen the burden of the tough question rather than stacking a bunch of easy things and they don't know what to talk about. So you can, if you've been all the way to this episode, let me make this clear. You can absolutely start doing this. This was an advanced training topic that was me kind of off the cuff at a lot of these places here trying to explain these points. And you might be thinking, how am I supposed to apply this? Like, that sounds really cool and theoretical, but like, how can I really use it? You absolutely can start using this. So if you want some guidance on how to apply these tactics and techniques in your upcoming sales conversations, I'm happy to have a conversation with you entirely for free about what it could look like to start implementing them incrementally over time so that you are guiding your prospect to a decision that feels entirely up to them, but you are in control the entire time. As long as you're selling something that's ethical, that has your prospect's best interests in mind, if it actually helps them, you have a moral responsibility to get as good at this as possible so you can help the most amount of people as humanly possible. And if you want guidance in that, text CLOSE to 33777. You absolutely can get good at this. It's just a matter of you choosing to do so. I'm Ian Ross. This has been the Close More Sales Podcast.